Kevin Rice, thank you so much for joining Jess and I in another edition of the People Leader Accelerator Podcast. You have been of support to the PLA community in a number of ways. You've been a workshop host, you've been a guest speaker, now you're a podcast guest. I personally really respect what you do and think that you are in a particularly unique niche that's needed. Could you share a little bit more with our audience about the work that you do?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Jess. I'm really excited to be here today. I started my career as a software engineer, pretty quickly got into the management side of things and really loved leading product and technology teams. I was at a few smaller startups that got acquired, and then I spent about 7 years at Airbnb during its most hypergrowth phase. During that time, I scaled one of the teams from 15 to 150 people and then led a few other teams at Airbnb. And while I was there, I kind of honed my niche that I would come in to places that needed to scale. And as I was doing that, I got a coach. And before that, I didn't even know what coaching was. And it was so impactful for me that it inspired me to become a coach. And I started doing it part-time for about 2 years while I was at Airbnb. And then it became really clear that this is where the energy is. And for me, it's always about chasing the energy. So I found a good stopping point at Airbnb and started doing it full-time. And, I loved leading teams, but really feel like I found my purpose in coaching leaders. Most of the people I coach are heads of product or heads of engineering, and then there's some CEOs as well.
You've walked in their shoes. You've done that work directly. So, well, great. Well, you're really doing a service to the broader community.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And it's really fun too, because as we were preparing for this discussion, I realized, Kevin, that we've actually simultaneously coached leaders where you were coaching like the technical founder and I was coaching the non-technical founder at the same time. And I was like, what a small world, right? I'd love to talk more about what are some of the unique challenges of technical leaders. Many of the listeners of this podcast are working in tech companies, and so do face the challenge of supporting technical leaders, the joy and the challenge of supporting technical leaders. What are some of the most common leadership challenges that you see amongst this specific audience that you serve?
So one of the really unique things about technical leaders in particular at startups, because they're tech startups, the tech teams are the teams that grow the most. And so it's oftentimes like the CTO or VP of engineering then has the largest team out of all of the executives. And a lot of times the person usually started as a software engineer and it's like working with things versus people. And then they start leading a small team and then they're leading the biggest team at the company. And so that's one of the biggest challenges. And that's why I think tech leaders, it can be like, besides the fact that I have the tech background, just the fact that I'm focused on scaling is really important because the teams are growing so fast. And one of the traps that I find tech leaders, and this is any leader can fall into, but we'll just use CTOs, for example, because there's oftentimes what should a CTO do? And being like, oh, what does the CTO do at this company? And that can be good for idea generation. But the thing about startups is they are innovative, trying to do things that have never been done before. And no company is the same. And so when you start thinking, what should a CTO do? You're looking externally and then you're looking internally, but you're looking internally as like a judgment mechanism. Like anytime you're saying should, you're focused on like, oh, is this good or bad? The CTO's job is to make the company as successful as possible. And they run the tech team. And so asking the question, what am I uniquely suited to do that will make the company as successful as possible? That is the CTO's job. And so that shift then gets you out of this judgment mode and looking around at other companies and you're like, what are the highest leverage things that you are uniquely suited to do? And so that is one of the biggest shifts that gets people proactively thinking like, what does the company need? But we get stuck in this thing of trying to map models to other things. That's kind of one of the biggest shifts I've seen that hits any leader, but it's CTOs in particular because their job changes so fast as their team is scaling.
One of my favorite phrases is to stop shoulding all over yourself,
yes.
because there are so many shoulds, right? Don't think about what do I need to do from a technical standpoint. Start with the first principle of what does the company need and what does the company need to be successful. And one interesting thing I've noticed from the people standpoint and some of the best engineering leaders or technical leaders that I've worked with is because they're scaling so fast is some of the people problems, like coming up with the levels and rubrics on how to evaluate performance. And some of the stuff ends up being developed first with them because these are the largest. And so I've often found that this most successful technical leaders are also the ones that are the most forward people leaders because they're on the forefront of thinking about some of these things. Have you seen that as well, that they're needing to be proactive on that side of the house, not just the technical side, but also thinking about
Yes.
like topics
Yeah.
pretty critical to their success?
Yeah. That's a great point. And I've seen that with the CTOs that I've coached. And then when I was at Airbnb, I saw that happen for the first time, where it was like the tech team is scaling a lot, and we developed a lot of those people processes in the tech team, and not just levels, but also we would incubate diversity and inclusion practices there as well, because it was the biggest and the fastest growing team. So it's not quite a paradox, but it's often thought of as like, oh, okay, well, the tech team isn't going to be like the people team. But as you're saying, it's like, actually these things are needed for the tech team first. So then they do become important people leaders. So that's a great point.
I actually have a current coaching client who is head of engineering. And one of the biggest challenges that's faced is he's like the 100x, engineer who can go in and figure out all the things. And he's an incredible IC. He's also a lovely leader, but he keeps getting pulled on both sides. And I imagine you've seen this a lot, where you have like this incredible technical lead who can do all the IC things. They've been so successful, and just partially why they're being pulled into management, yet like maybe they're being leveraged in both capacities by the company. How do you think about how to sort that through with your clients, of like when to play which role? Both are really important for the company, but what's your take on that?
Yeah, I see that very, very often. And going back to the piece around figuring out what you're uniquely suited to do, there's going to be a bunch of things that you're not uniquely suited to do. Those are kind of the obvious things to delegate. They're like straightforward and obvious. Sometimes they're still hard to delegate, but you might have a batch of things that you're uniquely suited to do, both on the management side and the IC side. And you're like, okay, I have too many things to do that I'm uniquely suited to do. So then what I recommend is bucket all of those items into one of 4 categories. One is you're uniquely suited to do it because of your position. For example, the fact that you are the CTO or you are the VP of engineering or head of product means that, for example, speaking at all hands, like you have a special position there, or like figuring out the overall headcount. Like, even if you aren't skilled at it, you are that head of the function and you have to do it. So like those are the things that fit into that for your position piece. And then asking yourself, what are the things I'm uniquely suited to do because of my skills? And so there's certain skills that you have, and that can help you understand, okay, who needs to be upskilled in what for me to delegate this? And what hires do we need to bring in that have these skills? The next one is context. And I think it's really important to separate skills and context. Sometimes those get lumped together. So you can hire somebody from another company, highly skilled at some role, and they have zero context about your company and maybe zero context on your domain. And so separating out those is helpful. And you find like, oh, someone doesn't have the context. Okay, how can I get this stuff out of my head, documented so that more people have it? And then the fourth bucket is passion. So there's some things that you're uniquely suited to do because you're so passionate about it. And sometimes you just have to make a call of saying like, yeah, I'm going to delegate this. I love it, but it doesn't really make sense. I'm going to delegate it. Or something you might just think, I'm going to hold on to this because it gives me energy. And that's important for me. It's kind of one of those things where once you define the problem well enough, it solves itself. I find that putting it into those buckets, you start to see like, oh, okay, here's what I need. And here's what needs to happen for me to delegate these things.
I imagine there are some leaders that get no feedback or conflicting feedback as they're growing. What have you seen as some of the more common pieces of lack of feedback that should be happening, or conflicting feedback where they're just kind of like, I'm needed in these 2 places, kind of like we just talked about for the IC versus managerial stuff?
One of the things that I do whenever I'm coaching someone is I always do a 360 feedback round with them. In this feedback round, I do it with 8 to 10 coworkers and board members, investors, advisors, if that's relevant. And I'm clear that the feedback's anonymous, and I'm clear that the feedback's only being given to the person I'm coaching. So if it's a case where the person's not a founder and they have a manager, I'm clear that, hey, the manager's not getting this. And so I ran one of these for a head of product at a couple $2 billion valuation company. And he got the same piece of constructive feedback from almost everybody. And he actually never heard that feedback before. So this wasn't a case of the conflicting feedback, but it was like he'd never heard it before. And it's because people liked him so much. So like, I don't want to throw him under the bus in front of the CEO. So it was like that channel was a way to get him feedback. And that's why I do it. I mean, I would say 90% of the leaders that I work with are like really excited about it. And it's also something that I require. I'm like, I won't do this because there's so much interesting feedback there that doesn't come out when the feedback is typed, doesn't come out when somebody knows manager or HR is going to see it. And then one of the pieces of conflicting feedback that I can see, or that often happens, is a lot of times there's feedback to say no more often. And so there's this conflict where oftentimes a lot of people are like, yes, say no more often. But then when the person who gave that feedback about saying no is then said no to, it's like, okay, so that's kind of the dark side of it. What I work with a lot of my clients is like, you are the keeper of your time. Everybody's going to ask you for stuff and you have to keep the time for yourself. And a lot of times people's calendar ends up driving what objectives they get done. And that needs to be reversed. You figure out what the highest leverage things for you to do to drive your team and the company forward. And then your calendar should follow that. And so that's a big flip that needs to be made, because sometimes it feels like, oh, these things happen to me. They get put on to me. And that does happen if you're not proactive about it. Ultimately, if you're doing your job better and making the company more successful, that's better for everybody's career. That's better for company success, acquisitions, IPOs, all of that.
So many good themes in here around prioritization, around taking agency, stepping into a new level of leadership intentionally with some of these frameworks about how can I contribute best. I'm mentally making all these connections to some of the work that we do in People Leader Accelerator with HR leaders, where we're trying to, largely help HR leaders, step into that, similar role of taking more control, owning priorities, impacting the organization intentionally rather than just first in, first out, or whoever with the biggest business card has asked you to do recently. As you were speaking earlier, Kevin, about some of the unique challenges of these high growth technical tech orgs and the pressures that those tech leaders face, there's this term brilliant but difficult that a lot of technical leaders often get tagged with. And thinking about the relationship with HR, like often those technical leaders, they're doing so much hiring. It's rarely in between. It's either one end of the spectrum or the other. Either these technical leaders are best partners and doing all the great stuff with HR, or they have their own way of doing things and they don't want to partner with us at all, and they're our biggest antagonists. Can you talk at all about, maybe from your perspective as a coach to technical leaders, what should an HR leader do to partner effectively with someone that might be tagged with the label of brilliant but difficult?
That's a really good question. And I feel like my maybe sample size is kind of low for that. Okay. One is because I haven't been on the HR side trying to partner with difficult or with perceived difficult to work with technical leaders. And then the people that usually come to me have already gone through some filter of like, they want to meet with Kevin because they would like him to help me in some way. I have a very different lens that I see. So sometimes when I'm telling people what I do, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. There's so many brilliant jerks out there. I'm so happy you're working with them. And I'm like, I actually don't even really see them come to me very often. There's this sort of filter where someone has to kind of see like, oh, I want to change in some way. Sometimes people will come to me and they're like, I don't quite understand what I'm doing wrong, but I do understand that there's something that I need to do to be successful in my role and make this company successful. And I do get people like that, but there has to be a lens like opened up where they actually see that they want to make some change. So that's kind of like my vantage point on that. There is a coach that I know who specifically works with people who have been called toxic, but it's been interesting. It hasn't come up much. The people who come to me typically have a lot of EQ, I would say, don't necessarily always know how to use it.
I think that is helpful, especially for our audience, listeners that are typically HR professionals, trying to figure out when should I engage a coach? When is a coach helpful to a certain leader? And it's a very different type of coach if the leader doesn't want the help or doesn't see an issue than someone that is actively seeking support in some area. And so I'm hearing you say, hey, I'm the right person to partner with if you're a technical leader that's looking for some help to handle high growth. It's a different type of coach that needs to work with a toxic personality where the CEO is saying you need to do this.
Yes. Yeah. And I think another distinction that comes up for me there is the performance management versus coaching. And so it's really difficult to bring in anybody external to do performance management of someone. So let's say that there's a CEO and there's some executive who is not performing. The CEO needs to do performance management of that executive and needs to make it clear that like, hey, here are the areas you need to do better in, and it needs to be super clear to the person. And I did have one HR leader reached out to me one time about like, And I kind of explained this performance management distinction. I was like, okay, the CEO needs to be doing performance management here. And it was like, oh, well, this leader's kind of scary. And like the CEO doesn't want to do the performance management. So like, I'd like you to convince him that he's not meeting expectations. And the only person who can tell you that you're not meeting expectations is your manager, or if you're the CEO, it would be the board or something like that. So like if someone is really not doing well in their role, it needs to be clear, even if they don't agree. And if they don't agree, maybe you just have to part ways. You're like, hey, I thought I was doing a great job. CEO insists that I'm not. I don't understand it. At that point, you may just need to part ways. But if you have that like kind of internalized that like, hey, this is what I need to do to be successful here, then that's where the coaching can help. So that distinction is really important to keep in mind. Another thing related to that is a lot of times managers assume that like can be afraid to performance manage someone because they don't know how to do their direct report's job better than their direct report could. And so that sometimes gets in the way and they feel like, oh, how can I give them feedback if I don't know how to get them better? It's the job of the direct report to get better. And so I kind of look at it as like, there's like the what, which is the expectations. And then the how is up to the direct report. And there's many ways that someone can get better. But if you never set the expectation, then people don't know what to get to. And I've seen so many times where they're like, oh, I'm coaching this person, trying to coach them to get better. And I'm like, well, have you told them that like there's a delta between where they need to be? And they're like, no, I haven't told them that, but I've been trying to get them to be better. And it's like, no. First thing you got to do is make that delta clear. Just from clearly understanding the delta, they might just get there. Like there's so many ways to get there. You can engage with a coach, you could read books, you can do all kinds of things. But if you don't know the expectation, then the person's definitely going to be stuck.
Our video viewers can see, both Jess and I like chuckling with knowingly nodding. There's so many contortions that I've seen leaders go through to try to avoid a tough performance conversation. And I guess that takes us, Kevin, to a question around like how to set up that feedback, how to set someone up for success that's getting coaching. I heard you say, be really clear about performance expectations, whether somebody's meeting them or not, and what they need to do. So like that sounds like a prerequisite. What do we need from you? What do we need from this role? What are some other ways to set someone up for success in a coaching relationship?
When I'm talking about like performance management, oftentimes I use that word where there's like a state where they need to be at and they're like under it. The people that I'm typically working with are like performing pretty well. There might be like a couple areas, but ultimately it's more about them growing. And so you want to get ahead of things. I've heard from some other coaches that they've tried more of like what would be called like remedial coaching. And that's basically where like the person is failing so bad. At that point, it's kind of too late. And so I never took on one of those, but I had heard that like, hey, this isn't going to work. I typically work with people just like the niche that I'm in. It's typically people who were doing great at the previous role, but now their team is scaling and they're like, we want to get ahead of it. So getting ahead of it is really key. And so that's when you want to engage with the coach. Like a lot of times I think of coaching as growth and evolution. That's where a lot of times HR leaders can be afraid to like propose it because they're like, this person is actually doing well and I'm proposing getting a coach, but are they going to see that as like, you're not performing? But what it actually is, at least with leaders I work with, it's about growth and evolution because their role has changed or they just got promoted. So it's like getting ahead of it so people don't start falling behind. So it's like, okay, so you just promoted this person, or like, okay, this, let's say person was managing an 8-person tech team and you're going to triple the team. Don't wait for them to fail and have it become an emergency. Like get them a coach early as they're transitioning into it. So that would kind of be the biggest thing that comes to mind for me.
Thinking back to a few different instances I've had where I've had clients come and say, hey, we have someone, they're not doing that well. And they swear up and down, like, we're not going to get rid of them. They're not on a PIP. Like, we really just want a coach to help them get better. And then have had it turn out, oh, just kidding. We really did think it. So I agree with you on being clear about when to bring in a coach is really helpful to know. Usually if they're underperforming, it is not that helpful because there's something missing in the like clear expectations, having a manager that knowing whether or not we should part ways at that point if we've been trying, and that where coaching can be more successful is we have somebody who's actually doing pretty well. They have a lot of potential and we really want to open up or unlock that potential with.
Yes. Yeah. And there might be some things where it's like, yeah, they're not that great at this thing, but they're spiking in so many other things. And that would fit in the case of growth and accelerating in potential, even if there's some things that are like below the line.
I'm curious in your experience, and I know like we all only have like the data points of the clients we've had, but how often do you interface with HR or with like the technical leader's boss as part of your engagement? And if you have, what has been sort of the relationship or setup of that in terms of feedback or information sharing or structure for it?
For the people who have a boss, I would say like about half the time, someone else at the company will reach out to me to have the first conversation. And about half the time, the leader that I might be coaching reaches out. The vast majority are the person's boss is the one reaching out for the first conversation. And I think in that first conversation, the role I kind of look at the boss or HR here is really like do like an initial screen in a way to be like, does it seem like this person might be worth introducing the leader to? The most important thing, and it kind of goes back to what I'm saying, that there's like the what, like here's what you need to do in your role to be successful. And then the how is up to the leader themselves, is that the leader has to be super excited about the coach. So if there's something where it's like, if a leader's like, I'm really excited about this coach, but my boss is saying that like, I need to use this coach, or HR is saying we have this internal coach that you have to use, then, you know, if you force the person to use this other coach, then if they're like, oh yeah, it didn't work, well, that's something someone else recommended to me. So like one, it's not going to work. Two, then there's like, it's not owned by the person being coached. So like with anybody I'm working with, basically me as the coach and the leader both have to be a hell yes. It can't be like, oh, we think this will be kind of successful. It has to be like, yes, we are blown away. Like this is what we need. This is the right fit. And you need to have the leader making that choice.
Sometimes you're like, we got them a coach. They're excited about their coaching relationship. I don't know what's happening in that block box of, you know, what's over there. And I'm seeing that like there's still a bunch of things this person needs to work on. What should they do with that information? Should they be reaching out to the coach? Should they be telling the coachee to be reaching out and hope that it makes its way? Should they have regular touch points with coaches? But from your perspective in an ideal world, what would be ideal?
An option that I have when I work with people who have a boss is at the beginning and 6 months into working together, we meet in a 3-way meeting, and this can include HR too, or it can have HR and not the boss, but like meeting with somebody besides just me and the leader, is go over the goals that we've set. And that's something where then the boss or HR can then give input to. If it's like, oh yeah, focusing on these 2 things, what happened to that third thing that's like performance management stuff that we've already discussed? And so that's a good place to give feedback. I find it can even be more valuable as something of like, okay, how do we enlist the person's boss in helping them at that? So like back to that example of if someone is taking on too many things, a lot of times those things are going to be coming from the person's boss. Then it's like, hey, we have an agreement here. Like we know there's this dynamic where the boss is going to be asking you for a ton of things. And like the goal is for the person to push back or show the priorities, show why they're not doing these things and why they're doing these other things. And so that creates that alignment there because there needs to be some adapting and understanding on the boss's side. Those are meetings that I'll do. And I would say about half the people who have bosses take me up on that and about half don't. And of the half that don't, about a quarter of them will in their one-on-one be like, no, I'm just comfortable bringing this up with my boss themselves. Usually it's been me, the manager, and the person that I'm coaching. Yeah. So hopefully that gives some light on it.
That's helpful for listeners to know, like, hey, if you're experiencing some challenges with a leader, you know they have a coach, enlist the CEO or whoever the boss is into that loop as part of the conversation, potentially as one option. Can you talk about when you run 360s, how often you're running them, and if there's anything different about running a 360 structurally than what you would see internally, other than it's just, you know, it's going to
yeah. So I run it near the beginning of when I first start working with someone. The person already knows a lot of what they need to work on. So I don't like wait and delay things because startups move fast. So we start working before then. And then I do it at the beginning. And then typically about a year in, it can be helpful to do it again. Sometimes it's not necessary to do again. It's really clear. Sometimes we might identify like a couple of people to ask for feedback from. So let's say the person is trying to get better at how they're running meetings or group communication or something. They might ask a couple of peers and their boss or HR or somebody like, hey, I'm trying to get better at this. Can I ask you for feedback as time goes on about it? And then at that point, we have like a few people to give feedback and you don't need to do the whole 360 again. So after doing it the first time, it kind of depends on the situation, but there is that step of like setting things up in a way where it's like, hey, would you be up for giving me feedback on this specific thing? And then the person says yes. And then it's like, okay, then you have a partnership on it versus the like, just random, like, hey, any feedback for me? So if you have that agreement that like, I'm going to ask for feedback for you on this specific thing and you're ready. And then the person comes to you and it's like, oh yeah, okay, you wanted to get better at giving presentations. Here's my feedback on it. So like creating those partnerships is super helpful.
I'm thinking back about, some coaching horror stories that I've been involved in as an HR leader, where the coach started upselling and trying to coach everyone on that leader's team, and then hosting leadership team meetings, and like it became a business development activity for that individual. And it's so hard in the people space, and sometimes we need to get creative. But I'd love to hear from your perspective how executive coaching can be measured in terms of return on investment.
Yeah, I think ROI with any people thing, as you said, is hard. Let's say you had like an okay VP of engineering who was like okay, struggling-ish. And then think of a case where you brought in or promoted somebody who you were like, wow, like this is what that's supposed to look like. I don't know how you put a dollar value on that, but you can feel it and you know it. It's basically like night and day. So when I kind of look at that, it's like, okay, how do I put a dollar value on how much that okay-ish head of engineering was versus this one where everybody's blown away? I don't know what that is. If you looked at like from the compensation side and you had a executive with their total compensation, if they just improved even a modest 20%, that can be like $200,000 a year. There was a few studies between 2000 and 2010 that all kind of converged somewhere between 650% and 750% ROI on coaching. A couple of consulting firms did that. It's generally a huge unlock. I don't know how they measured it. That's hard to do. That's not the kind of stuff I do. I mean, the way that I invest in myself is if I see some kind of development program where I'm like, well, this is going to up-level myself. It doesn't matter to me what the cost is because I know it's going to be worthwhile. So when you're talking about executives, like having someone with like ICs or first line managers, I don't know what the math is on that there, where you might have to think more about budget, but like, it's so clear to me that getting the right person up leveling and having somebody scale with the company. I love to see companies like Airbnb where Brian Chesky was able to scale from the founder to continue to be the CEO. There's a lot of up leveling that you have to do through that. Like the first employees are culture carriers. And so if you can have them scale, that's so much better than bringing in someone else. And like external retained search firms can charge $125,000 per role, which is much more than almost any coach charges per year. So those are some kind of like numerical-ish things. With a high growth startup, like you want your executives, the executives have so much leverage. If you're dealing with a different kind of company that I don't really work with, like a business that's not really trying to innovate, then I think there's different kind of math involved. So it is hard, but those are some like data points that can sometimes be helpful, because a lot of times it might be getting buy-in from the person's boss. Like back to what we were saying, like if the HR leader wants to influence the performance of the person or the performance of a leader, it's like getting their boss on board is going to be the most important thing, because no one has as much power as someone's boss. So like if you get the boss excited about coaching, then it's like, okay, this is going to help get the leader excited about coaching. So yes.
I guess in a go-to-market role, you can, talk about revenue. And hey, if you're able to coach up or support a chief revenue officer, you're talking about millions of dollars of impact. In a technical org, I guess just following that labor productivity perspective, like 20% is meaningful for one executive. But if they have a team of 25 and that team in aggregate costs $5 million, $6 million, and you're improving the effectiveness of that team as a whole, now you're talking big dollars through executive coaching. You talk about the leverage. It's not just the leader, it's the team.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I guess putting an investor hat on, if you're trying to get a product roadmap advanced and you're burning capital along the way, it could make a significant valuation difference or cash runway difference. And I don't know how to calculate that. I would say like in the PE world, I'm talking about EBITDA and multiples. In the VC world, we're talking about cash burn and how quickly can you get to profitability or the platform product. But there are calculations to be done, I think is the point. And the ROI could be expressed in different ways for different types of roles. But it's probably a lot more than just productivity for that individual. Jess, I see you nodding. Do you have a way of calculating ROI with your mentees?
What you're bringing up is like the amplifying effect that happens when it's a leader, and the larger the organization, the more amplification of that productivity or that speed. I was also thinking about things like retention. This is a topic that comes up a lot for people leaders of how do we retain. And I've found that coaching is often a great way to be able to retain leaders and the people under them because they have a better leader that they're, who's guiding and mentoring and supporting them. I think about just in speed, like accelerating decisions. Oftentimes we find thrash in organizations because decisions either aren't clear or we keep coming back to them and reopening it. And so putting it in the context of if we could have made this decision instead of taking 6 months on it, if we had clarity within 1 month because we had coaching to get them to drive to that clarity, how do you put a dollar value on that? And I also sometimes think about if it is a leader that maybe doesn't realize potentially like their style is not as easy to get along with, things like alignment with their own team, with the exec team, there is a lot of value that people will place on the ease of being able to work with somebody else as well. And to Kevin's point, you kind of need to know the context of the organization and what might influence or move the needle with the leaders for making the decision on the budgets for it. But hopefully there's something in here, if not a bunch of things in here that listeners can pull from. Kevin, one of the topics I know is a really popular one, though, when thinking about should I bring a coach in? This is like a learning and development eternal question, too, of like, how do we make sure that what's being learned will be retained, that it will last, that it will go beyond when Kevin gets to meet with this leader on a regular basis? How do you think about being able to reinforce that for the longer term?
One of the things that I do is a lot of times people think coaching is just about insights. And it's kind of like, oh, there's an insight. But what you have to do is work across all 3 levels of actions and behavior change, thinking patterns, and then feeling as well. And so if you move all 3 of those forward, then the person actually becomes the new leader instead of something they have to remember to do. So that's a big thing that I focus on. I think it's a good question on how, once the coach is gone, like what to do to keep things moving forward.
I think a lot of the like behavior elements that you're talking about are true of I look for how does it start to go from this is a thing that used to be hard for me to this is instinctive. So for example, working with a leader who not great at upward management. Initially, we do a lot of work around, okay, well, what's your boss going to think? What do you want to position to them? Let's start with that as like the beginning of every conversation that we have, just to kind of build the muscle to getting to a point where we'll be having a conversation. They're like, oh, and I should also be able to flag this in my notes for my one-on-one for my boss next week, right? Where it's just, it's almost like taking a breath for them at that point. So I think that resonates with me. I tend to do a check-in with my clients. So even after they offboard with me, I do a check-in with them 3 to 6 months later just to see how things are going and what's happening. I think for anybody who's looking for a coach, asking them this question of like, what do they focus on? Because your response, Kevin, around, hey, there's 3 levels of what I look for in my sessions across time, across those 3 things are indications that it's happening, right? It moves from conscious to unconscious. That I would feel like is a pretty solid answer of going, okay, this coach understands that I'm not just doing something to make someone feel good for a moment, but I'm trying to teach them something for the long term. You had shared these kind of hidden elements that sometimes trip people up.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
These 5 hidden impediments. And I was hoping that you could share some of those with us, if not all 5.
Okay, great. There are certain things like, okay, what's going to stop my team from scaling? Okay, obviously hiring a bad external manager. People know that could be a problem. People are like, no to look into it. These are the 5 things I see people often don't know about until they start working with me. So one is you or your direct report are doing their old job instead of their new job. That's like one of the most important things. When I scaled the team from 15 to 150 people, I was always like, define my new job and do that. Because there's all these things where I'm good at the old job and I'm not good at the new job. And it's like, oh, you have this comfort zone. So keep that defined. The second one is key engineering or product decisions get delayed because of your calendar. And the root causes to that can be that you haven't delegated smaller decisions or you're fearful of making big decisions. So like, what are the highest leverage things you can do? Sometimes that's to make a decision. And then if you don't have time to make a decision because you don't have time to think about it, clear all of your meetings. It doesn't matter what meeting that is, clear that all and do that. The third one is your team isn't operating from a shared mental model of how the company works. A lot of times you hire in people, some people come from startups, some people come from Microsoft, some people from Google, and everybody's like, oh, this is how things work. But things can work in many, many different ways. but you have to be on a shared model of it. At a company I was at before, there was like, some people were doing the Google way, some people were doing the Facebook way. And it's like, okay, what is the way of this company? The fourth one is people avoid structure and process because you think it's going to slow you down. And so people kind of look at it as a spectrum like this. And there's like structure and process, and then there's speed. And they're like, where do we want to turn the dial? But actually what you want to do is turn it into a two-dimensional graph where you're like, what are the processes that are going to speed us up long-term in particular? For example, there might be like a new QA or release process that it's like, yeah, that's going to slow you down in the short term, but in the long term, you're going to get rid of these giant incidents. And then the fifth one is tenured employees are resistant to change. So a lot of times when you're talking about the new stuff, people feel the old stuff is devalued. And like you'll often see someone come in from another company and they're like, yeah, like all that stuff's broken and screwed up. We're going to fix it. Even if they're not being that blatant about it, there is this feeling that the old stuff is not important. So one of the really important things is to value the contributions. Like when I was at Airbnb, we had this code base called Monorail written in Ruby on Rails. And a lot of people were complaining about it. And they're like, oh, this code base, it's like, okay, well, we have 100 engineers. We're going to scale to 1,000. And this one engineer on the team was like, I look at Monorail as a beautiful thing. It's like, that is the thing that got us to where we are today. It is printing money for the company. And look at all of these people that stay on Airbnb because of it. And I was like, all those decisions, it's like, oh, why did we build this in a bad way? It's like, because we didn't have many people or we needed to focus on something else. So every decision you've made got you to where it is today. So you value those contributions, you focus on the future and talking about why. And then sometimes people aren't a fit anymore. Like there are some people who are just want to be employees at a really small startup. And it's kind of funny paradox where their job is to kind of make the company into a place they don't want to work anymore because they don't want to work at a 1,000-person company. And sometimes managers and the individual themselves feel it's not okay for them not to enjoy working here anymore. But that's okay if things have changed and it's not a fit. And then you have those in or out conversations. And then sometimes people are like, yeah, thank you for telling me it's okay. Like it doesn't make sense for me to be here. Sometimes people are like, oh, it's okay for me to be unhappy, or I'm accepting that this is the new world and I like this new world because it makes sense now. So those are the 5 kind of rapid fire things that I see.
We do have a few accelerator round questions for you to try to give some golden nuggets of wisdom to our listeners. All right. So People Leader Accelerator, we're all about high leverage learning. And so if you could recommend just 2 resources to an emerging people leader, what 2 sources might make that cut?
The Big Leap, this is kind of one of the best ways to figure out these unconscious beliefs that are running you, that are like in your operating system that you don't even realize. And then the other book is Crucial Conversations. I think this is an older version, but this is like the best book on conversations I've seen. So like, and so much of the work scaling leadership is conversation. So I would say The Big Leap and Crucial Conversations are the 2 resources that are really great.
Love it. Great visual aids too. The fact that you were able to pull them off the shelf, impressive. What one sentence of advice can you share about how to accelerate a successful executive career in today's environment?
For me, it's investing in yourself. That's always something that I've done a lot of. And I think sometimes it can be like, oh, if the company sponsors this, I'll invest in myself. If not, I won't invest in myself. And it's like, what would be better to invest that money in than yourself? You're always going to be with yourself. And when times get hard, you being able to be there for yourself and to move things forward is super important. And you're always sitting with yourself, even if it's not leadership growth, if it's personal growth, that's the best thing you can invest in. So I think people underinvest in themselves.
Kevin, how can our listeners connect with you?
Ping me on LinkedIn or my website, kevinricecoaching.com. I also have a lot of articles that go kind of more in depth on a lot of the stuff that we talked about today. And there's other articles I have. So if you go to my website, you can see those there.
Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate all your wisdom. I always find it especially fun to talk to other exec coaches and learn from their wisdom too. So we appreciate you and thank you so much again.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.